Hi, and welcome to The Curling Show, the podcast that brings you interviews with the sport's top athletes and the people who shape the game. Brought to you by Fit to Curl, a sport-specific guide to training for the world's greatest game, by John Morris with me, Dean Gemmel. We may not all wind up as Olympic curlers, but following the programs in Fit to Curl will help you feel better on the ice and help you make a few more shots. To purchase a copy or to find out more, visit fittocurl.com and our fan page on Facebook. The man who makes the calls for CBC during their coverage of Capital One Grand Slams. Bruce Rainnie, welcome to The Curling Show.
Hey, Dean, pleased to be here. I've been a fan for a while, and I'm ready to go with you here today.
All right. Hey, I appreciate that. I appreciate the fact that you listen to the show. I know you do the evening news in Prince Edward Island, Bruce, supper hour, as you the Spud farmers seem to like to call it. Then you also covered Olympic sports like rowing and kayaking and boxing. I think you've been tapped to cover Rogers Cup tennis. You did a documentary on Sidney Crosby. And now you get to see some very good curling at 4 Capital One Grand Slam events every year. I do hope, Bruce, that you spend some time on university campuses dispensing career advice.
Well, Dean, it's good to be versatile. That's what I always tell kids. Make sure you don't put all your eggs in the one basket. And as you mentioned, in a company like CBC, when we for years have had the Olympics, it's been a valuable thing to have your foot in many a sport pie and be able to jump in and do something like a canoe kayak event or a boxing event or Rogers Cup tennis, which is kind of my summer baby. I love seeing Federer and Nadal, but in the winter I've come to love this curling beat. First thing I ever did for CBC with curling was 2003, the World Championship in Winnipeg. I was the on-ice reporter, and it was in the women's final, Colleen Jones and Debbie McCormick, and Debbie McCormick won that, and it was Randy Ferbey and Ralph Stokely from Switzerland, and Ferbey won his. So that got the blood beating, and I haven't looked back.
So that's your introduction to the sport, the Worlds in Winnipeg. Let's talk about how you approach it. No matter what those rowers or tennis or hockey players might tell you, I think curling's the world's greatest sport, of course. But I know you didn't have a big background in it before that. But I also know that since your nose appears to be intact, I don't think you knew much about boxing before Athens either. So how did you prepare for curling?
Well, I started off, first TV job I ever had was as the evening sport anchor in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And in my newsroom was the supper hour sports anchor, and her name was and is Colleen Jones. So if you hang around or hung around Colleen a lot, obviously through osmosis you had to pick up a bit of curling. And that was just as she was hitting her sort of second wave, her second prime with Nancy, Kim, and Marianne. So, it was great to deal with her and to get that feel from her and to get the love of the sport from her. And Mark Dacey, of course, was coming up at the time as well. From there, it's just the sort of thing, you watch it, and how do you not like it? The players are just so skilled and so strong, and they're so accessible, too. As a media guy, that's the one thing that struck me at the Worlds in 2003. And even in 2006, I had the pleasure and the privilege of being the on-ice guy when Brad Gushue steamrolled through Finland to win his. And it was just a huge broadcast thrill to be there for him and to see how accessible these players are. And they don't turn you away and they don't run from you. They want to talk to you and give you good answers. And it has everything I like in a sport all balled into one.
That said, before you met Colleen and you started in curling, did you have any of the typical biases as a guy? I mean, I don't think you grew up around the game. A lot of people, even Canadians have some biases towards curling. There's a sport for their grandfather. Maybe they're not truly athletic or physically demanding. Honestly, did you have some of those biases?
No, I didn't, Dean. I got to tell you, I've always loved I'm a TV junkie and a TV sport junkie, and whenever the Brier or Scotties was on, I'd watch any draw I could and pick up whatever I could from the announced teams. And I was and am a huge Don Wittman fan, and loved watching Don and Don Duguid do their thing, and later Don and Joan McCusker and Mike Harris. So no, I always watched and always hoped at some point to see my path take me to a spot where I'd be able to be part of a curling broadcast, and here we are today.
You touched on Don Wittman there, and of course you became the lead voice of curling broadcasts on CBC after the too early passing of Don Wittman. Talk about the challenge of replacing one of Canada's most celebrated broadcasters. Well,
back in 2006 in Torino, Don and I were working on the curling, and we actually got to spend a couple of days together. He liked a good deal, and so we went shopping for Italian leather shoes in Torino, found a couple, by the way, and we got to talk a bit of his philosophy, and I was just a sponge soaking it up. And I remember him saying to me, and this is almost verbatim, he said, curling's a great sport because it's the only sport where every player has a microphone on. And I said, yeah. And he goes, so when you're the play-by-play guy for a curling event, you have 8 players on the ice who are in touch with the game and, believe me, know more about the game than you do. And I said, of course. And he goes, now go beyond that. Seated beside you are 2 Olympians, Joan, who won gold, Mike, who won silver. They know more about the game than you do. And I said, yeah. He goes, so you're a distant 11th here in the pecking order, and your job is to ask good questions, get to commercial on time, save your emotion for when it's required, try to pick out the little flows and tendencies in the game, but just don't let the game and the players be the star. That was his philosophy, and it's always been mine. But to hear him say that, it crystallized for me what made him just the greatest curling announcer of all time. So when he got sick and ultimately passed, I was chosen to be the guy to fill in behind him. And those are colossal shoes to fill, and I don't think anybody ever could. But I remember him saying to me, all you can do is, just the best you can, be yourself, and, curlers are good people. They'll take to you.
I think you took his lesson well, Bruce, because one of the things I'm not trying to blow smoke up your skirt here either, but I think one of the things that you do let the broadcast breathe, and I like that. I think it's important. You also have 2 in the booth with you who do tend to talk a bit. Have you ever turned to them and tell them they're talking too much?
No. You know what? The funny thing that happens in the booth is whenever I do veer into the sort of avenue of analysis, you can't see this at home, but they'll look at me with eyebrows raised as if to say, come on now, be careful. And it's always a great moment, and occasionally Mike will say, uh-oh, Bruce, here he goes again, pontificating on whether it should be a draw or a hit. The 2 in the booth are magnificent. Joan has, they both know the game inside out. I think their respective strengths are, Joan really has a feel for the chemistry and dynamics of a team and what make a team work, and obviously she knows that from her Schmerler days, and she's a real sports psychologist in a way, and understands those very important team dynamics and who has to do what at what time. Mike is just, he's clairvoyant, and with the telestrator, he's phenomenal. And I remember, I'll never forget this, in the Brier in Winnipeg a couple of years back, Martin Howard in the final, Craig Saville for Team Howard threw his second rock of the end, and it was, I guess, the 3rd rock overall in the 10th end. And it looked fine to me, so I kept quiet, and Mike said, huge mistake. Kevin Martin's going to have a draw to the 4-foot to win this Brier. And there were still, 5 rocks to come, and Mike had it. And that's what Kevin Martin had to win the Brier. And I realized then this guy can just see so far ahead, and I think he is, the 2 of them are the best at what they do, in my very partisan opinion.
Do you? I'm sure you watch the TSN coverage, and they have a little different or a little different approach. Vic still after 18 years acts as if he's brand new out there, and that's sort of their shtick, I guess. But what do you think of the difference in styles?
Well, it's pronounced, but by gosh, they do a great job. I think they do actually a wonderful job. Their production is superb, and how do you argue with Vic, Ray, and Linda are household names, and they're like people you want to invite into your living room, and I think that ultimately is what you're trying to do as a TV host or team, be accessible to your audience. So, I think they just do a superb job. I think the difference is, I think Mike and Joan are just maybe a little more technical and maybe still a little closer to some of the players who play the game, and I think that might be the difference. But they're 2 distinctly different broadcasts, but I would hope 2 very effective ones.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. I think, and then I think Brian Mudryk and Russ Howard is another style again that's working pretty nicely in the morning broadcast.
Yeah, and I think that Russ brings a great eye to it as well. So yeah, I think it's different, and it should be. There are different people involved, and I think Mike and Joan and I certainly we all have senses of humor and can go that way when required. But when they're watching a game, boy, I got to tell you, they're focused intently, and every shot means something to you, and they want to let you know at home why that's 1 inch this way or 1 inch that way. And I find that personally invaluable and ultimately very entertaining.
Hey, you talked a little bit about players being mic'd. Are there any other sports you've covered where you wish the players were mic'd? Tough to do in boxing, of course, but I've always thought golf, for one, I really wish they would mic the players. But
well, they occasionally do, right? You hear them on caddies.
Right.
There's an occasion, especially on the LPGA. I'd love to hear that. I think it'd be fun. They occasionally are able to stick a mic onto a hockey uniform somewhere and pick up some sounds there. I'd love to hear it. In tennis, they allow coaching now on the women's tour. It'd be fun to have the players' mic to hear exactly what is being said between players and coaches during the changeover there. It just brings you so close, and good for curling. I'm not exactly sure the date or the moment or the milestone when it happened, but good for curling and the players to realize that this is the thing that can make our sport totally different and totally accessible to fans and just, by extension, totally unique.
Yeah, I think it's been a boon for curling, and I've never quite understood the reluctance of some other sports to do it, although maybe Tiger Woods was talking about things that they didn't want to hear, people didn't want to hear about either. So,
yeah, in retrospect, that's a sound theory. It's not been the best couple of weeks for Mr. Woods.
Although he might have been text messaging, too, so we're not sure.
Yeah.
Hey, we're not that far out from past the biggest event in curling in the last 4 years, the Canadian Curling Trials in Edmonton. That Howard Martin final was certainly a matchup that we've seen in a lot of Capital One Grand Slams, and during those broadcasts, you've interviewed groups of the top players, on the broadcast, and more than a few of them over that time have criticized the process. But I think in the end, when the final three teams are Martin, Howard, and Jeff Stoughton, it seems like the whole long journey was validated, don't you think?
Yeah, it worked as long as now, and this, I mean, Canada is the self-proclaimed curling power in the world, and we're 2 for 6 in terms of gold medals at the Olympics. So as long as this process has not mentally and physically exhausted the teams that have emerged, then yes, it's worked fine. And as a fan of the game, and an especially huge fan for the last 2-3 years, I thought there was some real justice on the men's side when Martin and Howard played in that final. I thought that, if either of them had been upset along the way, then the process really would not have worked, because they have so distinguished and distanced themselves from the rest of the teams over this quadrennial that they so deserved to be there. And I think that on that day, the Martin team was better and deserved to win, but I was just happy to see them emerge. On the women's side, there wasn't as clear-cut a favorite, and I think that's the way that draw broke down, and we'll see how Cheryl Bernard does. It's not a team with tremendous international experience, but she's pretty savvy, and I don't think the pressure's going to get to her, so, best of luck to them.
Yeah, I think that's a good assessment of it. I think myself and most curling fans were pleased to see that Martin Howard final, even though we've seen that game a ton. Like you said, I think it does. It wouldn't have seemed right to me if they weren't playing. But hey, let's talk about the next Capital One Grand Slam getting underway later this week in Guelph at the Sleeman Center. It's a typical great Grand Slam field. I hope curling fans realize that. A big international contingent at this one. But, of course, there are also a large number of disappointed rinks that aren't named Team Martin. And like at the World Cup of Curling, you don't have the CTRS points chase to talk about. How do you approach this broadcast?
Well, it's obviously it's Canada's first chance to see the team that will represent them on the men's side in Vancouver. So I would be lying to you if I didn't tell you that Team Martin's going to get a bit of attention this weekend, and that we're hopefully, pulling for them to at least see them through to a quarter and a semi and even a final, so that we can continue to build that story. I think, Dean, and I've heard you talk about this to, I think, George Carey's and Jeff Stoughton both. I think one of the stories that we have to start working on and talking to a bit now is how many of these marquee names, these so-called marquee names that have been around this sport and dominated this sport forever, and names like Stoughton and Burtnick, and to an extent Furby, and maybe even to an extent Glenn Howard, who knows? But how many of those are going to stick around for another, forget 4 years, even 1 or 2 years? And I think it's a question that now has to start being asked. There were so many eggs put in this 2010 basket. What do teams have left, and what kind of commitment do they want to make now? It's going to be very interesting to see the face of this sport, I think, dramatically change over the next 16 to 18 months.
Yeah, it will be interesting. I think you make a good point there too about. I mean, we're talking about some of the an era here that I think we'll look back on with some of the really great players. And I don't know, we've got a team like young Jason Gunlickson. There's guys like Reed Carruthers. There's lots of great young talent out there. But I think we might look back and see how Martin and Howard dominated. It might be a real special era. Yeah,
and throw Furby in there too. Yeah. I was thinking today. Somebody asked me this morning, I said I was going to be on with you doing this, and they said, well, what if Dean asks you who your player or team is of the decade? That's how good the decade has been on the men's side.
Who is your player or team of the decade, Bruce?
Yeah, well see, how tough is that? Because, the team really was the Furby team, but they didn't have the best last half of the decade. And do you go with Howard, who dominated the last 4 years, or do you say Martin, who's won 13 Grand Slams and the last 2 Briars without losing a game, and finally got the monkey off his back at the Worlds? I guess when it's tough to pick a player and a team of the decade, then that means it's been a a marquee decade full of some of the best curling you'll ever see. So, like you say, I think the heat's going to be on teams like Mike McEwen and Reed Carruthers, and if Pat Simmons continues to play, or Gunnelson, or whomever, because the torch and the bar, they have been set so high by these guys over the past 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, guys like Glenn and Kevin, it's really over the last 20 years. Kevin, 20 as a skip. Glenn playing with his brother and having great success too. But I think I'm a huge fan of the Capital One Grand Slams, as anybody who listens to this broadcast knows, and I think it's important for the game. But there are some fans who are reluctant to embrace these events. I think the broadcast audience certainly growing. It's respectable numbers. It's not the 1.2 million you'll get, for the Olympic trials final, but that's a special game. Do you ever think, though, that my feeling is one thing these events could use is individual identities? You're a tennis guy. You know that tennis has a Grand Slam, and it certainly wouldn't be a great Grand Slam if the French Open wasn't on clay and Wimbledon wasn't on grass. Do you think we have to start forging a little different identity for each one of the four?
Well, if your point is that they do tend to blend together a bit, I would say, to an extent, yes, especially the first three. The one at the end of the year where the women join and it's a combined event that seems to have a little something. I heard you on here one time, and I'm not sure to whom you were speaking, so forgive me, but maybe you, for one of these events, you play with the purse a bit, and maybe if it's not a winner take all, it's winner take most, and throw a bit of jam into it that way. I would agree. I'd like to see at least one of them different in some way. Am I smart enough to tell you what way that is? Absolutely not. But
no, you're not the guy I'm going to ask to make it different. But
yeah, but it would be fun to see. And like you say, the Grand Slams in golf are exactly the same. They have an identity. The U.S. Open's going to be on the hardest course. The British is going to be wild with wind. And, the Masters is played in the same place every year. So if you could come up with something similar, I think that would help. That being said, our numbers for the last one were among the best we've ever had, and I think it might have been because it was the first curling out of the gate for the year, so a lot of people wanted to see. And for this one, it's a chance to see the team that will be the Olympic team, so I suspect good numbers again. But to grow it further, I'm with you on that. I'd like to see subtle, maybe not so subtle differences in either where they're played or how they're played.
Yeah, I mean, there are probably a few factors you can play with, whether it's ice conditions or style or format. Whether one is we introduce something like a 5-rock rule in one or whatever else. And I'm a big proponent of one event that we do winner take all, because I think one shot for $100,000 with the loser getting zero would be good television. It's the only time here I watch the LPGA on tour on television, and the one event I watch is that one where the winner gets $1 million and the runner-up gets something like $80,000. It's nice. Yeah, no, I hear you, and tell me that every set in the country wouldn't be glued to that, where it's a draw to the 4-foot with $100,000 on the line, win or go home. That's a fascinating concept. Wouldn't be the easiest thing to sell to teams that have to pay to travel to get there, but right. I think you'd have to do it with teams that have already won some money and have qualified for an event somehow. And it's great for me to say because I wouldn't be throwing it. So
yeah, me too. Because all I'm doing is sitting 200 feet away watching it. So.
Right. You just have to call it.
Yeah.
Hey, all right, Bruce. I appreciate your time. Like I've said before on the broadcast, I think you bring a lot to it, and I think in a short amount of time you've come to grasp the game pretty nicely. We finished with a run back. You listen to the show, so you know what that's about. I give you a topic, give me your thoughts in 1 to 3 words. I look forward to being part of my first ever run back right here. Right. Being the less talented musician in your family. My wife is a 2-time ECMA winner. She plays the best fiddle you'll ever hear, and I could practice forever and never catch her. I should add, though, it seems that you do play, right? You play the guitar and you played with her. Yeah, we do actually a few concerts down here on the East Coast together. It's she carries them. I play a bit of backup guitar and sing a little, but she has a website. Her name's Kendra MacGillvray, and she's a spectacular fiddle player. So look her up. You'll be impressed. All right. I'm glad we could give her a little plug here. How about being the less funny brother in your family? Yeah, my brother's a card. He's the host of CBC Radio Main Street here on PEI. Very funny guy, but he and I can go toe-to-toe pretty well, although I would give him the edge. All right. I'm just giving you a hard time here. I'm not quite sure if you're the less funny brother, actually, but how about a windy drive in the bridge from New Brunswick to PEI? It keeps you awake, and you got to be sure not to drift, and it's not a good time to be an SUV driver. You want your car low, so a nice sort of Volkswagen Jet is your ideal. Yeah, is that your ride? It is right now, and it was bought specifically with that in mind. Nice thinking. Kidney stones.
Boy, oh boy, Dean, you've done your research. At the Rogers Cup Tennis 2 years ago, I was getting set to call the final between Rafael Nadal and I believe it was Thomas. I don't even remember because the stone hit me that morning, and I wound up in hospital. And if you've never had them, I don't wish them upon you. And if you've had them, you'll understand why I didn't make the broadcast.
I have heard the pain described as exquisite.
You know what? I had a nurse come up to me, and she was the mother of 5, and she said she would gladly trade her next pregnancy for a kidney stone because she's had both, and she said I'd take the pregnancy again over that. So that put it in perspective for me. Yeah.
Sure. Ray Turnbull's pending retirement from TSN.
He's one of those characters. I'm telling you, he's kind of like we have a guy up here, Don Cherry. You know Don well. Does Hockey Night in Canada. One of these characters that'll be very, very tough to replace. Russ Howard will do a great job, but never diminish the fact that a guy's been a character and a great purveyor of information and instantly recognizable in the curling world. He's done a magnificent job.
U.S.-Canada in the World Junior Final.
Oh, man. You know what?
What do you score?
Well, the heart says Canada, obviously. I like that U.S. team. I'm going to say it's going to be like 4-2 Canada, and the fourth goal will be an empty net goal with about 15 seconds left.
Yeah, that's a pretty good prediction. Evenly matched, although I think U.S. had their best game against Canada so far. So
I think so, yeah.
Colleen Jones landing an Olympics gig covering curling with NBC Sports.
Yeah, I don't know how she did it, really, because she's a full-time CBC employee. She must have pulled some strings, but I think Colleen's great. I'm one of the biggest Colleen Jones fans in the world. She was always great to me. She's an absolute uber mom, the greatest mom you could ever imagine. One of the top 3 female players ever to play the sport, and the sport is better with her continued association with it.
Interestingly enough, she'll be doing the games, I believe, with a young broadcaster here from Short Hills, New Jersey.
Hey, who's that now?
Andrew Catalan. I think he's doing the sports, doing the call for NBC Sports.
Andrew's in good hands.
Up in Albany.
Okay, well, he's in very good hands.
Yeah, he's originally from this town I live in now. Anyways, and finally, the unfortunately named Crapo Curling Club.
Yeah, I remember coming to PEI as a kid, and I would say to my dad, how do you pronounce the name of that town, knowing that it couldn't be Crapo? It is.
Indeed it is.
That's how you say it.
Well, it's actually it's a tiny village, isn't it?
It is. You come off Confederation Bridge heading towards Charlottetown. It's about 15 minutes from the bridge, and you enter and it's beautiful, too. It's a great little village, Crapo, and I thought growing up it had to be like Crapoy or something like that because you'd never want to say Crapo, but that's what we say.
Well, yeah. See, it's a good thing you don't do the Briar because there's often a team from there. You have to, although not recently, but yeah, you have to say that they're from that club.
You're right.
Bruce, I appreciate your time again. I usually give everybody a chance to name their sponsors. I don't think you have a bunch of curling sponsors, but if there's anybody you want to mention, including your wife, go ahead. Well,
I dropped her name before, KendraMacGillvray.com. Her new CDs, Love of the Isles. Pick it up. You'll love it.
All right, Bruce. Good luck in Guelph this weekend. I think it's going to be another great event, and I'm unfortunately not going to be there, but like everybody else, I look forward to seeing it.
Yeah, Dean, listen, real pleasure for me. Anytime. Love to do it again with you.
That's Bruce Rainnie on The Curling Show. Remember to watch the great curling on CBC this weekend during the Capital One Grand Slam, now the Swiss Chalet National, or make the trip to the Sleeman Center in Guelph and see the games live. And of course, what would the end of an edition be without another shameless promotional reminder from me? That's right, if you haven't already bought a copy of Fit to Curl, now is the time to make good on that New Year's resolution and pick one up. Thanks for listening. Here's the band with songs you should seek out on the iTunes Store. Black Pudding.
You go to work every day. You blend into the crowd. But in the silence of night, he's got a living